Mic check on microphone 8. Mic check.
Mic check. Mic. So it should go green. Mic check. Mic.
Bottom one's dead.
Is it not? Is it not?
I don't actually, and usually because that's the extra and that goes in for now.
I've seen both of them as I just did it.
Good afternoon. The time is 4 o'clock. The Wayzata Public Schools Board of Education work session for May 20th, 2024 will please come to order. Let's go around the table for roll call introductions. To my right, beginning with Director Cater.
Cater,
Dan Ginestra.
Paras Bhinde.
Valentina Ayers.
Sarah Johansson,
Chase Anderson.
And I am Milind Sohoni. Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. The first item on our agenda is the Finance and Operations Report. And I will ask Dr. Anderson to introduce our speaker for today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. It's my honor to introduce Dr. Ray Queener, who is here today from Teamworks International, which is a consulting firm that does work in a variety of capacities. We've selected Teamworks to do our enrollment and housing study and do a follow-up review of our school attendance areas. And Teamworks and Dr. Queener have extensive experiences with both of those endeavors, along with many others. Dr. Queener's served in a number of roles within public school systems. I probably won't remember the broad range of all the things, Ray, that you've done, but I know he's been a technology director, he's been a finance director, and a superintendent as well, and probably a number of other positions within public school districts within the metro area. And he brings a wealth of knowledge to not only us, but to Teamworks International. And we look forward to working with him and his associates to do a review of our enrollment patterns within the district. They'll take a look at, and he'll share all the different variables that they'll take into consideration. But it'll be housing growth, projected rollout timelines for new developments within the cities which comprise our school district. And then they'll take that information and projected growth by area within the school district to help us review our existing school attendance areas and then make recommendations for the future. So I know he'll talk a little bit about the timeline that we have put together for that, and all of it occurring hopefully by no later than December of this year, where we'll have the results of the enrollment housing study, obviously, and recommended proposal for any changes to attendance areas. Ray has met with our SLT and has done a couple of brief planning meetings and has been engaging with some of our team in regard to some of the preliminary data that will be needed. So without further elaboration, I think at this time I'll turn it over to Ray Queener to provide us with this presentation. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks, Chase. Thanks, members of the board, for the opportunity to be with you this evening, or afternoon, I guess it still is. We're not quite evening, but as Chase had mentioned, I've been around school districts for a long time. That makes me old. So this is actually my second career. The only positions that I hadn't worked in a school district was building principal. My path to the superintendency was non-traditional. And I can talk about that at some point because it's really quite a story how I went to work one day as a tech coordinator and left as the business manager for the fourth largest district in the state. And so I came to the superintendency more through business and operations than the traditional path. I also had never worked in food service, but when I was superintendent up in Cambridge-Asante, the food service director took care of that, and I ended up on the serving line in the first few days of school, so I've added that to my resume. But during my career in education, I was a client of Teamworks for about 20 years. And so when I sit here as a consultant, I'm also a practitioner for many of the things that we talk about and that we use. And I think that just helps add perspective and value when we do our work as a consultant. So we're going to talk primarily around the budget adjustment process tonight, and I'll talk a little bit more about Teamworks in a moment. Under that hood is a really significant and robust data and analytics demographic housing analysis that we complete that supports the process. And so when we talk about boundary adjustments, we want to have as rich of a data set as possible and making sure that projections are never perfect. Ask any weathermen, and they will tell you. They're somewhat sure what happened yesterday, but tomorrow they have less. There's no weathermen on the board, correct? So we do, but we want to have as many projections as possible and many variables as possible in our projections to get as accurate as possible. So we're going to do a couple more introductions. I'll tell you a little bit about TeamWorks, a quick overview of the school analytics, the process, and then the questions, give you a chance for questions, comments, and insights. Talked about me. So TeamWorks has been around for about 30 years. The work we do is on the graphic on the right-hand side, and it's centered around the desired daily experience for students, families, and staff. And all of our work is really to deliver on that experience. So we work through the authorities of governance, management, and consultation or engagement, all supported by data analytics. So the services that you see on the left-hand side are all through those three authorities delivering on the desired daily experience. No different than what we're going to do with Wayzata Public Schools. And we'll be working through governance and management, and we will be providing opportunity for engagement with your stakeholders or interested parties. One thing about TeamWorks, other than that, was it about a 45-second ad? One thing we've not done is advertise or market. So we're really unique in that we are a referral-only consulting firm for 30 years. And in those 30 years, between the founder and myself, we've worked with over 400 school districts in 20 states. And so we really believe in that referral basis. Somebody hears something that we do and they tell two friends, and that's how we get into districts. So you don't see us at conferences and booths. You don't see us sending out flyers. It just hasn't been our strategy. So, all right. So moving on, I'll talk a little bit about the school analytics. We use as the basis the 2020 census. There's a methodology for updating that census each year. And of course, the farther out you get, it becomes still a projection, but we won't have solid numbers again until 2030. What I've found in my experience in the last 5 years, it's not bad, the tools that we use for that projection analysis. We also look at your trend data, both your enrollment trends, but also what's been happening from a census standpoint in the school district. One of the pieces that, if I put my old business manager hat on, that I wish that I would have had, is that this data that we're providing is drilled down to the census block instead of a macro picture of an entire school. So we can look at census blocks, neighborhoods, and just get real deep information. So for example, if we're looking at a neighborhood, we can do a profile of the neighborhood as well. So what's really nice about this is it's also, we provide the district access to this data as well. And if you can run a website, you can get into the system. So we use all the historical information. We use your data around the facility utilization. So what is your current programming capacity? That's not the word you use, though. I'm sorry. Your capacity of buildings from a program standpoint. There was a
Maybe functional capacity?
functional yes. I knew I didn't have the right word, so thank you. Your functional capacity. So if you have a special education class in a regular education classroom, we count that as a special education size, not a 30, 35 students. So we make sure that we have that analysis complete. The student socioeconomic data comes from your student information system, so we upload all of that data into our tools. And then we start performing analysis, and we look at your market share. Market share we define as what % of the students living in a census block attend a Wayzata area public school. It doesn't have to be their neighborhood school, but just any Wayzata school. Housing analysis, we do everything from when was the home built, what was the sales, what style, what neighborhood. And again, all of that is really helpful data when you're doing boundaries to know when you're moving families, making sure that you have contiguous neighborhoods and you're not totally disrupting an apple cart. So that's a quick overview of a very, very robust data system that we will be using to support this. When we do modeling, one thing that's unique about this is that we model out at 5 and 10 years. So if we were to say, what would happen if we move this boundary? We send that back to our team and they model that out. To my knowledge, we're one of the few, if only, companies that model that out that specific. The data that is captured on a 1-year basis can change. And so if we only look at that 1-year impact, it may change how we look at the future. So let's talk a little bit about the boundary adjustment process. So we use, those of you that have worked with TeamWorks have probably heard the word frameworks somewhere. If you haven't, you'll hear them. But we use 3 key frameworks in our process. We use a decision-making framework, the guiding change framework, which we'll talk more about, and the whole system view. And I'm not going to go into a lot about the whole system view, but any of you that have ever done brainstorming, sometimes when somebody throws an idea out, we kind of get on one track. And so we use the whole system view to make sure we're looking at the whole system. But I'm going to talk in more detail about the decision-making and guiding change. So as I mentioned in the process, we use our analytics tool. We will use a guiding change document. So what will happen is the SLT will develop a draft of ideas and bring to the school board for your refinement revisions. And ultimately, the board will act on that guiding change document. And that's what sets the ball moving forward, if you will. We will use a design team that will look at options based on your guiding change document. And then we will have a selected input team that will give feedback on options. We will also use your website and your communications to allow other interested parties in the district to weigh in. So the idea here is that we use a couple of structures, but we really open the doors to get and provide as much opportunity for people to be as engaged as they want. We will also spend some time with your communications folks to make sure that we're out ahead of the game, communicating what's happening and when, and as we map this process out. So that's a quick flyover of the process. It's a little bit small on the screen, but we kind of have a model design, but the very first thing that we do with a school district and any engagement is we sit down and we co-design the process. And we have not done that yet here. That's our next step, is that we'll sit down with the SLT team and we will map out, based on their experiences, how many design team meetings they might think, how many input team meetings, what would they look like, what kind of modeling will we do in terms of our team for boundary changes. So this will look most likely a little different, but this is a kind of a typical starting point for us. Usually after the board approves a guiding change document, then our team takes that and they develop the first pass of boundaries. So we're independent. We don't have any history. We don't have any skin in the game, if you will, in terms of moving. So if we were going to design the district, what would it look like based on your guiding change? And that's where the design team then takes that work and modifies it and refines it. So we have some days and times built in here. The goal would be to be in a position for the board to act on any changes by December of 24. And we very easily will be able to do that. So the guiding change document, any board members have any experience with the guiding change? Seen it before? Okay, I'll just do a quick overview. Basically, it's a tool where we map out from the current reality on the left-hand side, what's everything that we know? Why are we doing this? Why are we even talking about this? To what are the desired results on the right-hand side? What are the outcomes? What is the options or ideas that the board ultimately would want from this process? We then spent some time talking about what's unacceptable. The first one that's always in every guiding change is that we will not violate state or federal law. So that's unacceptable to put an option on the table that will do that. But a really common one in school district boundary changes is that we will not create a change that puts kids on a bus for greater than an hour. Generally, districts are saying we're not going to bus an hour and a half or 2 hours to redo boundaries. So it'd be those kinds of things. What would be a non-starter for you as a school board? And we just put that on up front so we don't design anything around that. And then the center of the graphic is where the design team works. So as long as we can go from our current reality on the left to our desired results on the right without violating the unacceptable means, then those are viable options. And they will work to put those together. I'm an old math teacher, so graphically, you'll see a lot of boxes and rectangles because that's the graphic ability I have. But this is a simple guiding change document. We just simply have 3 lists in a table format. And the next time I'm before you, we'll have some ideas for you to consider, and then you'll have an opportunity to refine and add to the guiding change before you act on it. Do you want, Board Chair, do you want questions as we go at the end? How do you typically?
Either way is fine, whatever you feel comfortable with.
I'm comfortable with
Okay.
whatever.
Let's go at the end.
At the end?
Yeah.
Okay. So the next tool is our decision-making framework. If you've had experience with the guiding change, you probably have seen this one as well. We orient this in terms of all the roles and responsibilities for folks involved in the process. And what I've found both as a practitioner as well as a consultant is that when people know what their role is, they're really okay with how the process works. They don't have to be the decision maker. And so we articulate this in our model that there are key roles. So in the center, in this process, the board is the choice maker. To change boundaries in school districts, that's an act of governance. The teams up in the consultation you're going to be your design team that'll create options for you in the upper right, and your input team and your public feedback via your website and the shared reality. And the idea is that the loop, the developing shared understanding loop, we do enough iterations until we're satisfied that we've got viable options that can be presented to the choice maker, in this case, the school board, and so that you can consider them. Once you decide, the management's job then is to implement well. And if there's a need for some refinement in the lower right, then we can refine as needed. But we do caution teams that refinement doesn't mean you refine it so much you change the option. Sometimes you just have to make some edits. So there's a couple of rules of the game. And I like boards to be fully aware of one key one, is that when the options come to the school board, your act of governance is to accept one of the options or reject them all. If the board takes an option and tweaks it at the board table, you undo all of the process that we go through. And so that's just, and if boards are uncomfortable at that point, then I tell them, don't do this process. Because to have your design team do work and all the input teams and your interested parties weighing in on the website, then you would just undo it all. So if you're comfortable with that, then what we do is we make sure that the superintendent is on the design team. And if an idea is brewing that may be a little bit out there or a little bit, different, then the superintendent plays a consultative role with the board to make you aware that, this is being talked about. And if the board is uncomfortable, you could change your guiding change document. If something now becomes a new unaccepted means that you didn't think about in the front end, we can make a change. You're not bound to what you decide on your guiding change document. Because really, at the end of the day, we want a couple, if possible, high quality options for you to consider and to take action on. We don't want to put something on the table that you're uncomfortable with that we'd have to start the process over. So the superintendent in this process is the liaison between the design team and the choice makers or the board. And then, as I mentioned, in the shared reality, the input team, they will be representatives from across the district that will weigh in on the options. And we will also use some survey tools to help others be able to have an opportunity to weigh in as well. So really, the idea is that we want to be open. I'm not a fan of the word transparent because sometimes it's illusionary, but as open as possible so people can participate and weigh in. So right now, it looks, the model that we have is that we would have some time with you over 2 to 3 months, both at the beginning, maybe a little bit in the middle, and then for sure at the end. We would have 3 to 5 design team meetings over a couple of months. And in between a few of those, we would be doing input team meetings. So we would have the input team, they would come and they'd give us feedback. That feedback goes back to the design team and they modify their options. By the way, the design team has a rule too, that anytime we go to the public or we go to the input team and we get feedback, they have to modify an option. They don't have to take all of it and incorporate it, but something has to change in the process. And what that does is it adds value and credibility to those providing input, that people are listening, that it's not just something that we conceived and that we're pushing it through. And even in the most contentious situations, I've seen that process calm a lot of waters, that people walk out of the meetings like they're listening to us. They hear us. I may not like it, but they are listening and hear us. So we'll do a couple of input team meetings to get feedback. We'll use your website to do some survey work and generate a lot of data. I already talked a little bit about that. So my key bullet points, you are going to get access to a comprehensive data system to support this. It's going to be open process. You'll have engagement from interested parties across the district. We all know that this is a hard topic for districts to talk about. You don't have families line up and say, could you please move my kid's school or our boundaries? That's not what people sign up for. They're there for a reason. So it is one of those really hard but sometimes necessary processes districts have to go through. And if we are focused on delivering on the highest quality desired daily experience for students, families, and staff, sometimes we have to make and do hard things. And I think communication of all the steps in engagement, people will know exactly what we're doing and when. There'll be no surprises. So that is my brief overview. Questions, comments, insights?
I have 3 questions. Do you want me to go one at a time or all 3 together? One at a time? All right. So the first question is, when you talked about the 10 years data, right? So it starts with 2020 base. Even the housing analysis, is that at least current or that's also 10-year-old?
No, the housing is actually updated on a quarterly basis.
Okay. All right.
But we start with the 2020 census data.
Okay.
But yeah, everything else is up to date.
Okay. Got it. Thanks.
So is there kind of a life expectancy for, so the final plan that we get, the final map that we approve, let's just say it's December. So is there kind of a kind of a lot like, oh, it'll last for 5 years, 10 years before we might want to look at?
We try to do everything we can to make sure it's as long as possible, but we do operate from projections. And economy plays a big factor. No, I mean, you do have some development options here, but you're not a rapidly growing suburb where there you kind of all bets are off the table. And I was working with a suburb that is very rapidly growing, a lot of developments, and we were hoping for 3 years. But again, trying to position this so we're not doing this very often because it is such a hard process.
I am going to piggyback on Paras's question. I thought first he was going to ask the same question that I had, but it was a little different. So housing analysis gives you information about the population, so to speak, between the censuses, right? So how about demographics? Census gives you a lot more information just than the housing analysis. So how do you deal with the demographics themselves between the 2020 and 2030 census?
So they're two different databases. There's several databases that we tap into for building your system. The 2020 census, all the data that we can get is compiled. That's kind of the base. The housing information that we get from Met Council, anything from the county, that's all up-to-date information. So if there's any parcel lines that were moved or anything along those lines, that, housing values, that's different than what was in the 2020 census. So we update that based on that identifier, because everything is drilled down to one parcel, and then we can update different fields. The housing analysis that we get talks about when the home was built, when was the last time it was sold, any information that we can obtain from that all comes from Met Council and the county information, not from the census.
Who lives there?
The demographics that's coming from the census side is coming from the census.
Right. But what comes from the housing analysis? Does the demographic information come from there? If, let's say, between 2020 and 2030, 200 new houses are built, do you know which people live there?
No.
Which kind of, which demographic children are going to come from?
Yeah, there we would be looking at trend. That's the best way you can project is trend, is what's happened in the past and try to replicate that curve in a trend. But we still don't, there's no guarantee. But the census projections, the census group does do projections from demographics on the census basis. And so we're mirroring that with your student data. And so we can do that analysis to make sure that your student data should somewhat reflect what the census data is projecting. Okay. So that gives us some assurance that the data is accurate as to the best as possible.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, by the way. This is fantastic. So what involvement do you have? We have a number of partners that have been helpful and informative in the past. So we've got the builder community and their projections of what they're going to do. We've got some early childhood data, and who's coming in way before they come into our system. And there may be some other organizations that are kind of also mapping, looking at people. In what ways do you work with our community and our community partners?
First and foremost, so for housing developments, we map and model what we know and what's tracked. So we get this question frequently that there's actually a company, because you're in the 9-county metro area, there's a company that monitors all developments in all school districts for us, and they update that quarterly. But sometimes things happen in between the quarters, and that's where we, if Chase or Scott let us know that, we were down at the city and they were talking about this, we can investigate that and roll it into the model. But we try to stay away from, and again, I was a business manager for 10 years, so I had the pleasure of talking with city planners, builders, other theories, and I had to try to interpret all of that to put it into projections. And we just try to take all that myth out. Builders sometimes overproject, planners sometimes overproject, and the economy underprojects. And so we have to try to figure out where those numbers are. What's really nice about the system that you ultimately will have is that we'll map those developments out, and we provide the system to the office of the superintendent, and that Chase may delegate that to Scott. So Scott will be able to click on a development and know exactly how many homes are in that development and what is the current build out as of that quarter. Which for those of us in the business manager seats, that would have been a godsend. That was a way long answer than you probably wanted, but.
Can I follow up that? What about early childhood and birth rate data? And what's your?
We use what's in the system. So, the school district is tracking some of that data. We also have the census, and we try to reconcile the census data with the school district. And then we have to model projections based on trend. We don't do the door knocking, and that's the only way you're going to get 100% accuracy. But I should also add to that, we monitor closely the birth rates. So the state of Minnesota does a really nice job for birth rates. And when you're in the metro area, you have to kind of figure out where people are going to the doctor, because if they cross a county line, they might be in a different count. So we kind of have to monitor that. I had a really unique situation for a school district that was right on the South Dakota border, and they left the state to go to the doctor. So their birth rates were very low. So we had to figure out how to model that. So, but anyway, the data is really good for that.
Thank you, Sarah, for asking those questions about early childhood. I also had curiosities around that. My curiosity is also around, so we are an early childhood through transition district. Yep. And enrollment doesn't just mean for us. I mean, a lot of the bulk of it comes at kindergarten in that early stage, but we have new enrollments that happen all throughout. And I'm wondering how you take that into account as well.
Great question. So in the business, that's called a grade migration ratio. So what percent of the third graders that are here this year are going to become fourth graders next year? And in that ratio, it will capture any growth that occurs. So in a suburban district, if they're growing, that's going to be a number that's greater than 1. If you're declining, that number might be less than 1. So if you are growing in your school district, and again, we will capture that ratio over 10 years. And that's kind of the baseline projection modeling. So as you grow across a number of years, we factor that in, and then we add in any developments that's outside of that growth. So the ratio actually will capture a certain amount of growth and build out. So we have to monitor the developments to make sure that we've captured enough. And sometimes you have to put those factors into it. So that's the technical answer. It's in there was the non-technical answer.
And so this is a question for you, Dr. Queener, as well as for Dr. Anderson, what insights you might be able to provide. So I'm sure it may be known to you that, construction building, new buildings is kind of in our future. So, the maps as you draw them out, are they kind of with the idea that we might build a new middle school, Medina Elementary School in that same lot? Kind of do you, forecast, additional construction when you draw your boundaries?
Yes and no. So the short term is that we're going to bring you an option to consider this December. But we don't do that in isolation of what could happen in the future. So we're not asking you to approve a future set of boundaries based on potential construction that hasn't occurred yet. But we also are mindful of, for example, in one district I was working at, their growth was south of the district. And so we created space in the southern schools because that's where that's where they're going to need it before they have to build the next school. If we filled those to capacity and left space in the north, now we've violated the bus route issue. We'd be busing kids an hour plus north. So we'd pay attention to that, but we don't provide a map for that. Answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
So when you talked about the trending or forecasting model, did I hear that right, that it's not about generalizing student numbers, but you look at one click down? So for instance, special needs versus non-special needs. Is that accurate or?
Correct.
Yeah. So just looking at the parameters that you have shared, would you add some context or background when it comes to special needs? How do you forecast that particular trend, if you will?
Oh, that is particularly on trend.
Okay.
So if we know who is in the system, and then if anybody new coming to the system, most likely will follow trend. Is that the question you're asking?
Yeah. I mean, how do you forecast that? Because again, when we have been reviewing finance, and there is clearly a cost
Correct.
that is more than the rest of the population. So when you forecast the boundaries and the student growth population, how do you account for that special needs category?
Yeah, we assume it's going to follow a similar trend.
Similar
If it's been on a straight line growth, then we're projecting straight line. If you've seen an uptick or you've seen, we'll model it according to what the trend is.
Okay.
But we also are looking around. We don't just look at your district. We're looking around at your neighbors. We're looking at how does this compare to make sure that we have some reasonableness to the numbers that we're forecasting.
Okay. Yeah, and that's what I was trying to understand, because again, you talked about birth rate as an example. So I was wondering, are there any other data sources that you tap into to see, is there any uptrend or anything to spot, not just based on how the WYZATA trend is?
Yeah, so the census database that we get is the entire United States. So we have the census information from the United, doesn't matter where you're at, we can pull a census block. So we know all of the census data of all the neighboring districts around WYZATA. We don't know school district information unless they happen to be a client.
Okay.
But we do have the census information.
Okay.
And so we can look at different models to make sure that we have reasonable justification for the projections.
Okay, makes sense.
I might just add on that too, that as we consider remodeling and preparing our existing schools for a wide range of student needs, keeping in mind flexibility is really important in design, not only for remodeling, but in utilization for existing buildings. And then for the design of new buildings, that's an important aspect as well, is that we make sure that we're in the best position to have good agility to be responsive to the unique needs of our students that come to each building. And I think in the past decade, we've done a good job with that in our existing buildings and taken that into consideration for the new facilities that we built, and we'll continue to do that into the future. One of the challenges we currently have is we have some buildings that are being underutilized and others that are right at the max or perhaps beyond capacity, and that really takes away that flexibility and our ability to be responsive to the unique needs of our students. So I would suggest that this process, and going back to Dan's question earlier, is to seek a set of attendance areas that are going to be responsive to the short to medium term prior to when that new construction might come on board. So we will need to take into consideration, another process if and when the 10th elementary school and the 4th middle school are built. But, and Ray, you said something before also of, creating capacity, the most capacity in the buildings that will have the greatest growth. For us, that's going to mean moving students from west to east, because generally, if you look at our westernmost schools, whether it's Greenwood or Northwoods or Meadow Ridge, they're pretty tight right now, and there is some capacity to in the more eastern parts of the district. And we really need to, before we go to the community, to ask for more resources to build more schools to demonstrate that we're maximizing utilization within our current facilities. So I don't know what experiences, I know you've had lots, but if anything I said elicited a thought from you in regard to how we best do that, feel free to share.
Yeah, the biggest thing that we try to not do is move the same family in a short amount of time. So we want to pay attention to that. We don't want to be moving one family a year and then a year later, if you did go to voters and you started a building, have to move them a year or two later. We ideally want to do it once for at least a grade span. So if a student is in an elementary school, if we have to move them, we'd like them to be able to finish from that moved school. So we try to create that structure. And then the second thing that I would say is that even though you may have capacity in a building on, the east side, and you're maxed on the west side, as we start to move kids, we also don't want to violate length of bus routes or demographically, significantly changing a school district. So one of the questions that I'm just going to ask it for you because it's a really common question that boards ask is how do we address the demographic diversity in our schools? And what we try to do, at least from our side, our consultative role is that we advise school districts to work toward district average, not become district average. So for example, if you have an elementary school that has X% of special education, we don't necessarily are going to redistribute all of your special education kids throughout the district so that every school has the same percent. But we also want to pay attention to that we don't skew that or create greater inequities. So we're looking at this through a couple of different lenses, whether it's race, whether it's special ed, whether it's English learners, all those demographics. So when we do changes, we want to make sure that we either are working toward district averages, but not necessarily landing or guaranteeing at district average.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of related questions. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so the first question is about how many decision-making nodes do you typically forecast for a board like ours? How many times before from start to finish? How many times would we have to come to the board table and say, okay, go ahead and do the next step? Or
I would say that so we would come in the beginning and we'd develop the guiding change with you that starts the process. And most likely, if we are going from summer to December, I could see for sure at least one update of what's happening. Of course, the board receives all of the same packet information that the public and the input teams are getting, so you're aware of what the designs are. If you have feedback, you funnel that through the office of the superintendent. And again, if there's something that is concerning, the board can come back together and say, you might say, I'd like to revisit our guiding change document. And you could amend that during the process. When we're later in the process, we want to have all of that kind of nailed down because we don't want to have to repeat it. We'd never meet the deadline or the timeline.
The second question I have is from as many districts as you have dealt with, this is kind of a technical question. Is the board decision, does it have to be unanimous or is it a majority of the board members approving it? What is your experience on that?
The last 3 that I have done, 2 were unanimous, 1 was split. And there's probably there's not a right or wrong answer. Unanimous might mean we did a great job and there really was only one choice. But a split decision might mean these are hard choices. Yeah. We did 2 really good jobs, but, and that's kind of what happened in that one district is that we had two really good models, and some board members felt one was better than the other. So it doesn't have to be unanimous.
Okay, so you have no set requirements of unanimity.
No.
Okay,
No.
all right, thank you. Yeah, Sheila?
Hi. When you talk about us getting the packets with the information, what kind of, comments will we have access to? What kind of, when the community is, submitting things online, or when other decision or input, stakeholders are saying things, how much of that do we get to see as a board, to see what kind of concerns people had?
First off, we would give you reports. The structure of them will be dependent on the number of responses. So if we put something on and we get 10 responses, you'll get the 10 responses. If we put something on and we get 1,600 responses, then you're going to get thematic analysis. So I've spent a lot of time with ChatGPT to help do some of that work, because we also have an amount of time that we have to turn things around. What I will tell you from experience is that you will get a lot of I call it self-interest comments. It's my house, it's my kids. And so what we try to do is we try to look at that thematically across neighborhoods, and we put those pieces together. So you'll get that picture versus giving you 1,600 raw comments. I don't know what to expect for feedback. I don't know what your experience has been.
In your experience, when community members have an opportunity to go online, do they also email all of the board members the same comments usually?
They do. And what I've seen as successful is that if you're managing your own email for the board, or you have a board email address, that the response is that we've set up a process to gather this feedback. Thank you for emailing us, but if you want to get feedback, here's how you do it. Because we're not going to carry your feedback as a one-off. A little bit nicer, maybe, but.
Thank you.
Okay, I have one last question. It was really important to me coming into this presentation to hear from you that it's going to be a really specific and unique solution for our community. And I think I'm hearing that. But of course, you're going to be relying on your experiences in other places, that what has worked, what has not worked. Of course, we're relying on your experience for that. Is there anything that you want to add to that to kind of reassure me and reassure us that this is going to be Wayzata specific?
Well, a couple of things. One, from a TeamWorks perspective, we truly partner with our clients. And so we're not just bringing you data and information, and we're bringing a team of expertise as well. As Chase had mentioned, I've been around school districts for a long time. So you're going to get my expertise in consultation, and you get to choose how you want to navigate that. There are facilitators of process that just give you data, and then they just facilitate a process and let you decide. I think once you've been a superintendent, it's kind of hard not to share your 2 cents. So I'll give it to you, and then you can decide what you want to do with it. But we really want to be a partner with the district. The second thing is that not only do you get my background and expertise, you get TeamWorks. And we have, I think we're 11 consultants now, 385 years of experience in education from all different facets: superintendents, communications directors, and other folks that have been working. So if there's I have a consultant, she's actually out on the East Coast, that came from the special ed background. So I have access to that for our team as well. So you truly get our team, not just me and whatever my limits are.
One of the bullet point I saw is stating an input team of parents and staff, 25 or 40 of them, I understood. How would you be able to choose which of them are going to be in that team?
Well, usually my smart aleck answer is we just want people to agree with us. That's who's on the team, but that's not what we do. We build the design team first. So the design team is meant to be people with knowledge and experience. So we don't put interested parties on a design team. We build people that have knowledge and experience, like principals. Then, if we have half of your principals on the design team, then for the input team, we'd make sure the other half are on there. If we have some of the district level directors on the design team, we'd put the other ones on the input team. And then we would try to build a cross-section of every one of the schools of staff representing all the different levels, maybe different disciplines, and also from the parents, to the the degree we can, a demographic of what's representative of the school. So if a school has 10% students of color, we would want 10% parents of color coming from those schools to represent the demographic. The challenge is that sometimes we have to do extra work to make sure we're getting all those voices. And so we've actually gone out into the community to make sure we're hearing from all perspectives, all voices in the community. That might mean that we hold a different meeting to get their feedback and their input. But the goal is to get all voices to the table, not limit in any way. You're welcome.
One last. So based on what we know about Wayzata, are there any items or any blind spots that we need to watch for? Or so far, based on what we have done year over year, our experience is, yes, this is in line with what we have seen in other school districts, or generally it matches the trend, or again, do we want to watch for anything from get-go?
No two districts are the same. The economy could even pivot between now and August. And so what we may even know today may change in August. So I don't know from that kind of standpoint that there's anything to pay attention to. And the rest of the data set is going to be really strong data set that we will test and make sure it's as valid as possible. So I don't anticipate any big surprises. And as I mentioned, this is still a hard thing when you move families. I mean, we run a lot of data tables and we look at a lot of charts and graphs, but on the other side of all of that is still a family and it's still kids. And so we want to make sure we pay attention to that we're not just making decisions from an Excel spreadsheet. We know that there's an impact that's going to impact somebody.
Thank you.
Wiener. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, you have another one? Okay, go ahead.
I don't know how to go around it, but I still have a question about ESL students, for example. One side probably would be it's good that you have, certain amount of at every school because, but other side, other plus, I can see if the students, if are more concentrated in one building, it is better to concentrate resources and use your financial resources, use teachers, materials. And to be honest, I think it is much more easier to be ESL student with another friend and with another classmate and see each other growth than to be alone in the classroom. So how do you find the best answer in that situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's a lot of applications of that question in our process. So what we say around TeamWorks is that we help districts move away from a numbers game to a strategy game. And numbers might tell us to do one thing, but we have to be cognizant of a specific strategy, exactly what you're articulating. No district has unlimited resources we have got to pay attention to all those things, staffing, all of those needs, the needs of the kids. So we look at what's the best strategy for the district, and it may mean we don't have equal balance because this program is best served in this school or this area. it's better for kids. Or it might say, we've got enough of a student population where we think this program really could be distributed between multiple schools. In a perfect world, it's nice for every neighborhood elementary school to have the same programming, the same structure, the same look, the same feel. But we want to work toward that, but it doesn't mean it's always what's going to be best for the kids. So we pay attention to both when we do our work. You're welcome.
Dr. Queener, yeah, that was very, very informative, and we are eager to get started on this, I guess. Huh?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, we have the Human Resource Services report from Executive Director of Human Resources, Stacy Voss. She will review policy 401 and 403 for us.
Good afternoon, Chair Sahoni and members of the board. You have had the opportunity to review board policies 401, equal employment opportunities, and 403, proposed to be 413, harassment and violence policy. My intent today is simply to share with you information regarding personnel policies, or our 400 policies in general. Many of the 400 policies have legal implications for the district, as their proper implementation significantly impacts how we interact with our employees. As a district, we have repeatedly relied on the advice of MSBA to ensure our policies meet all federal and state requirements. It is our responsibility to ensure that we do not create or implicate current or future boards in making decisions outside of these recommendations. I encourage this board to continue our practice of following the recommendations provided to us by MSBA. There have been conversations at our policy meetings in which there may be the desire to share a different perspective in regards to moving forward with the proposed policies before you. It was felt that a work session was the best time and place in which to share those thoughts, so everyone is clear prior to presentation of the policies at the next board meeting. With that, I'm simply opening the opportunity for the board to engage in this conversation, knowing that myself, Superintendent Anderson, and Associate Superintendent Flansburgh are available if necessary to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. Just so we understand, this is not a decision-making time. We were just discussing the 401 and 403 policies, and if anybody has any comments, questions, this is the time to do it. So, Valentina, yeah.
During committee, I asked if it's possible to discuss about adding such kind of language as political affiliation, because in this environment, I strongly believe that this should be protected too, because I had some communications with parents, with some teachers who are saying that they are basically afraid to say their views because they are afraid of retaliation. So following what I read, to be honest, policy 2001, it states that school board is formulating and interpreting policies. And it also states from MSBA that school board set policy. And based on that, reading MSBA statement, and then I looked through the language of 121A03 model Minnesota statutes. It says only there are three things we're asking to include. It's sexual, religious, and racial harassment. And MSBA states very clearly that of additional language, it is not Minnesota statute requirement. And more, where should I find? The language, my point is, if we can, even MSBA is stating that as long as we are covering sex, religion, and race, it should be fine according to Minnesota Human Rights Act. And everything else what is added there is based on the requirement, what is MDE is pushing. My question is why we cannot add this language too. And one more thing, to be honest, I noticed that in the policy, in school policy, at the bottom, you see veterans being mentioned, but somehow the veterans are completely omitted in the policy itself. I believe in this environment, again, veterans should be respected and should be mentioned and should not be also, should be protected too.
Do you have any comments, Stacy, Dr. Flansburgh, Dr. Anderson? Again, that is something that Valentina would like to add to the policy, from what I understand.
Yes.
And so my response to that would be that is out of the recommendation of MSBA. Our policy very closely aligns 100% with the federally defined protected classes. And to step outside and create a new protected class does put the district at risk in its interpretation and its implementation.
Anybody else have any comments? Yes, Sarah? Yeah.
Have we had this reviewed by legal counsel, and what was their suggestion?
It has been reviewed, and their suggestion was that we follow MSBA protocols, their model language as their language is created with the assistance of attorneys. And if the district, in its implementation again, our attorneys would have to protect us if we weren't following our policies or stepping out of lines, and they would have difficulty doing that because political affiliation is not defined, so we don't know how that would look or how that would be enforced or how that would be protected by our attorneys if it were to be called into question.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Sheila? Oh, Paras, go ahead.
Yeah, and we had lengthy discussion in our policy meetings on that. And again, just to, obviously, we don't want the student experience to be any shape or form. It cannot be bad. So yes, the political affiliation plays into it. But again, just looking at all the facts, how do we actually operationalize? It is not the protected class, which is defined by state or federal law. And that's where it's very difficult to draw the line. I think Dr. Flansburgh talked about what build team has been doing and what are those operational steps we can take in each building. So we don't promote, we don't encourage, and we avoid some of these situations happening on the ground. So there are ways to handle them differently through operational processes versus adding them as a part of policy, which again, it's very hard to defend. Yeah.
Thank you, Paras. I think what we had chatted about as well, just going back to some of our conversations in the policy committee, was at the beginning of the year, Executive Director Voss actually presents to the administrators and reviews all of the neutrality expectations of all of our employees. We are not allowed to take one side or the other with any political beliefs with our students. It is our job to be able to be neutral and allow students that is already protected under First Amendment rights for students.
Thank you. Sheila, you had a question?
That was pretty much my question, that don't we have systems in place already for this kind of situation? And you answered my question, so thank you.
Yes. Yes, Dr. Anderson.
Yeah, I would just like to reinforce what Stacy Voss shared earlier in regard to our two primary go-to informants in regard to policies, our MSBA. They work closely with their own legal counsel, as well as close and scrutinizing review of state statutes and strong understanding of federal guidance and definitions as well. And then secondarily to that, we often, for many matters, not just policy, but consult the services of legal counsel. For the policy development, we have a long history of aligning our district policies very similarly to what MSBA has outlined, and with the guidance from legal counsel, so as to not create new policy language that may not be able to be supported by legal counsel or in alignment with MSBA. So essentially, to choose to veer from that, you as a board and we as an organization are indicating a willingness to take that added risk of interpretation and legal protections or lack of legal protections, and essentially indicating that the talent and expertise that we've consulted with and who spend a great deal of time immersing in this, we would then be essentially messaging that we feel we have better perspective on this and better knowledge about this than legal counsel and or our MSBA affiliation and professionals that study these types of things regularly. So that is our recommendation, and that will be our recommendation in bringing this policy forward to the board at a future meeting, as indicated or directed by you.
Thank you. Anyone? Heidi? Yeah.
I have one more add-on. Valentina, you mentioned something about, in your conversations, fear of retaliation.
Yes.
And I'm curious if HR could discuss just a little bit about what avenues there are that are available to our employees in the case that they are afraid of or in a situation of retaliation.
So we do protect our employees, and we do discuss retaliation and reprisals in all investigations that we conduct. So people involved in the investigation know that there are definite consequences if there is any type of retaliation or reprisals. Our employees and bargaining units, that is backed up by their union presidents and their union representation. And we even talk about what retaliation looks like. Retaliation could be going up and apologizing. Retaliation could be engaging in the silent treatment. So we really take a lot of time and talk to our employees about what retaliation looks like and how it really is at the discretion or the interpretation of the person who believes they retaliated against. So if there is that feeling, that creates an immediate investigation in which we determine if it was substantiated or not. And in most cases it is, because it is very much at how that person is feeling in response to the report that was made. So generally, what we tell our employees that are involved in things like that is not to talk about the situation at all. This is a professional setting, it's work. So the expectation is we're going to resolve this issue. You may need to change your behaviors, but we move forward and we don't talk about the situation in and of itself, but you demonstrate that you learned from the situation by engaging in appropriate professional behaviors moving forward. So we do really stress that to all of our employees when there is an investigation, because that's the last thing we want to have happen. Because if there is that fear of retaliation and retaliation occurs and the district doesn't act on it, that severely limits then how people will come forward to respond or report. And I know that there's always that fear, but I can say, with situations that actually occur, we do take very good care of our employees and do everything we can to prevent that retaliation component.
I need one more clarification.
Can I just make a quick comment on this? Yes. So I don't know all the policies that are on our, in our district, so maybe I should know about this. Is there a policy against retaliation, Dr. Flansburgh, that you remember or know of? If not, is the employee contract, does that have specific language against retaliation?
Retaliation is spoken to in our policies, and it is specifically mentioned and addressed when we give the Tennyson warning, conducting any type of investigation in the district.
Okay, so they are aware of this
Correct.
policy against
Yes.
retaliation. Okay, thank you.
I would like to have clarification, though. I have a copy from MSBA, and it states that, just a minute, while the recommendation is that school districts incorporate the other protected classifications in addition to sex, religion, and race, my understanding, this is the only 3 ones that Minnesota statutes are putting legally into us. Into this policy, they are not specifically required to do so by Minnesota statutes, section 121A.03. The Minnesota Department of Education is required to maintain and make available a model sexual, religious, and racial harassment policy in accordance with Minnesota Statute Section 121A.03. MDE's policy differs from that of MSBA and imposes greater requirements upon school districts than required by law. So in that case, my contra-argument would be, then schools are okay adding more language. It's basically the language. What looks like we are going to be taking is from Minnesota Human Rights Act, but it's not even required by Minnesota statutes. So we are okay that adding additional language, even though it is not required, can put us into lawsuits because of additional language, but adding political affiliation is too much of a burden.
I think the slight nuance there is all of the listed protected groups are those protected classes that we mentioned. An affiliation to a political party is not a protected class. That's where I think the nuance lies. Also, as a school district, we do have to follow different recommendations, and falling under the Minnesota Department of Education, if they make recommendations that maybe differ from the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, we would want to go in the direction where we cover more people so that we're not excluding anyone, because it just helps us. Because the other thing that we have to think about, Valentina, is this is how we communicate with our employees about all of the things that they need to be aware of. And if we were to just do maybe the 3 classifications that you mentioned, it still creates questions for myself and in human resources from our employees, because what does that mean? What does that look like? And the more clear we can be, the more information we can give, following the recommendation of MSBA, helps us to help our employees do the right things as we all work together in our work environment.
In that case, to be honest, what I noticed also, veterans actually, I'm not very quick at finding online. Under our policy, if we go down, it states veterans, but it is not listed at all. Is a wise vet. And it's actually, I dig into that information. It's under different name, but it is also says it is protected.
So I'm not sure if you're just specifically speaking to the equal opportunity employment policy, but we specifically address veterans' rights in that policy, as there are very specific procedures we need to follow when it comes to veterans in the hiring employment process.
I'm trying to open it, sorry.
And they are not identified as a protected class, but yet there are definitely procedures from the federal and state that dictate how we interact with them when they work in our environment or when they apply for positions.
Yeah, actually, for one, I apologize right now. Paris helped me out. When I was looking into Minnesota Human Rights Act, it was not listed, but I believe it's under different act. That's why I apologize for that part.
So,
It's fine. All of this can be confusing.
so one thing I think Dr. Flansburgh keeps repeating almost at every policy meeting is we may not have some language in our policies, but if they are a part of the federal law or the state law, those override our policies for sure. So if for whatever reason we have missed something, if it is in the federal law or state law, then we have to abide by those. Am I right?
That is correct.
Okay.
If it's federal or state law, and you have a policy that contradicts that, those overrule policy.
Okay, Heidi, you had a couple of
I have
questions.
just one clarifying question, Stacy. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the part of the reason that we go with the defined protected classes is because they are legally defined. And if we start adding in different groups that are not legally defined, we do not have a way to follow up with it, to understand it, and to define it in the workplace. Is that a correct understanding?
Yes, that is very much the correct understanding of what we're trying to share with all of you today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi.
I just wanted to clarify that retaliation and reprisal as it relates to staff is found in policy 403. And it's outlined in the regulations of 403B, in the regulations of 403.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I think this was a very good discussion. Thank you, Valentina, for bringing it up. So the next step, Dr. Flansburgh, is we talk about this again at our policy committee meeting in June.
No, well, we've already discussed and
Right.
brought forth. I think the conversation at our policy committee was to bring it here for conversation. We would then bring it forth to the next board meeting versus the work session for presentation for approval.
So that would be the June board meeting.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. I think that takes care of the agenda for our work session today, and there are no reports from the superintendent and teaching and learning. So it is now 5:17. The Wayzata Public Schools Board of Education work session for May 20th, 2024 is adjourned.